Call to order, February 27th, AMATS Policy Committee meeting. It's about 1:35.
I like brown.
I guess we've got all in attendance, although Mr. Steele is in for Mr. Flynn, Mr. Burke, Mr. Sullivan, Ms. Heil, Mr. Campbell are all present. Greg, can you walk us through our public involvement announcement, please?
Yes, all of our AMATS meetings are public meetings, and the public is invited to comment. If we have a business item, we will have presentation by staff or consultants, and then the committee will get an opportunity to discuss it, and then at that point, the public will be invited to comment.
Thank you. We have in front of us our draft agenda. Does anybody have any modifications they'd like to propose to the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda.
Second. Moved and seconded to approve. Any objection to the agenda? Agenda's approved.
Just,
Excuse me?
sorry, not necessarily to change the agenda, except for the fact that in my haste to get here, I did not bring the minutes. So you have 3 sets of minutes that were posted, ready to roll, and I don't have paper copies for you.
Move to approve anyway.
Yeah, I think that we'll go through those here just right now. So we have,
They have been posted for about a week and a half.
thank you.
Sorry.
The minutes have been posted, and at least I have received a paper copy at my place of work, and I assume others have had the opportunity to review them. So is it okay with the body to approve the minutes? I mean, I guess I'm comfortable approving them, but if you people want to wait for a month, we can do that too. I'm open to suggestions. Let's take the January 26th, 2012 minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any objections or corrections? Seeing none, those are approved. The December 19, 2013 minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any corrections or objections to those? Those are approved. The January 23rd, 2014 minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any corrections or, okay, those are approved also.
Mr. Chairman, just one comment if I could. January 26, 2012 is over 2 years ago. We need more timely minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that comment. I believe that we have worked diligently over the last year to bring those minutes up to speed. And if I'm not mistaken, those were the last minutes that were in arrear, were they not, Mr.
That's
Ryan?
We're caught up now.
We are caught up, I
Very
believe.
good.
So I have echoed your sentiments, not quite publicly, but noting, and you are correct, sir.
It's good we're caught up. That's a good thing.
On to business items. We have in front of us business item A, which is the 2011-2014 TIP Admin Mod number 9, with a memo and an OB report. Mr. Lyon.
So I'll start with the tip and the administrative modification, and then we'll let Mr. Boyle with the DOT present the obligation report. I believe just the information line, actually, there are things to approve on that. But for the administrative modification, we have 2 kind of major changes. The table 2, you'll see on the front page of the memo that's listed as 5A, shows the additions to the HSIP program. As you remember, the HSIP program is a federally funded program which is administered, and the priority, et cetera, is decided by DOT. This is not a program that AMATS decides on, but because it's federally funded, it gets included in our TIP. And so that's why you see it in the TIP, and that's why it's here before you. So these are changes, and if you went to the legal spreadsheet, you'll see these are all in the second and third page of the TIP. These are all new projects that are being included for the most part. So they're just updating the HSIP program. And then the next changes are that you see some in table 3, some moving around the funds related to the Dowling Road extension, and that we were advanced constructing some of the money, and so just changing some of the advanced construction necessary, really due to some more funding, some federal state funding that came in. And then the freight mobility study was originally in 2013, and now it's scheduled for 2014. As you remember, the challenges we had with getting the match for that, and we're pretty confident we'll finish getting the rest of the match. We have a small amount left to track down willing participants, pencil sales, and bake sales and all that sort of stuff. We should be able to get that last bit. And then the Regional Household Travel Survey, this is a project that was funded for $100,000, I believe, no, 200, and I can't remember the exact dollar figure, but what we had when we started negotiations, we realized the very tight time frame we have to get our MTP adopted, and we have several consultant contracts that are being put on the street, several RFPs. In order to get those all to line up so that we get our MTP adopted in time so we don't go into a lapse, required an acceleration of that household travel survey. And the contractor said, yes, we can do that, but we're going to need some additional funding. So this reflects the additional funding that we need to do that. And then the rest of that, I believe, is pretty much some standard stuff. It's Table 6 outside of the AMATS program, or not the AMATS, but the fiscally constrained portion. So this obligation report, I mean, this tip went before the TAC, and they recommended approval at their February 13th meeting. So,
Okay, so before I ask for public comment on this, let me see if I can summarize this. I noticed that we're making some changes to some things in 2013, and I guess what we're doing there is we're reflecting what the reality of the situation was. So we've got our records in arrears that are brought up to date with the correct funding amounts that actually were spent there, and then we're making some modifications to the 2014. And then some of these tables are just informational because they're really controlled by the DOT. They're not really an AMATS function per se, but they're informational tables within the TIP. Is that correct?
couldn't have said it better myself. That's
Thank you.
exactly correct.
Do we have anybody from the assembled audience here that would like to comment on this document? Seeing no one, I will ask for comments from the body and/or a motion if no one has any comments. Question, Ms. Howell, please.
Given that municipality had exceedances of the PM10 standard due to road dust issues, and there was a lack of magnesium chloride, and now I see there's no funding for CMAC in there, is that program done, or is there, I missed the last two CMAC. I'll ask now.
Working with Steve Morris on that, there was a year where they hadn't spent all of their money, so we didn't obligate some of it. So, and typically CMAC programs are 3 years. At least we have always gone under the understanding they were 3 years, but we've come to find out that maybe we can get a few more years out of that. So I'm working with Steve to figure out where we go from here, which hopefully could include some money in the 15 to 18 tip for this mag chloride, because you're right, we did have some exceedances. He's pretty confident that, those were kind of freak anomalies and we won't really see those again, but we're in Alaska, that we can easily see things like that. Freezing, warming, freezing kind of thing that kind of
So it could
got
be
us
as
there.
possible that we might see something in the future, another modification, if it turns out we were able to use
Right.
CMAC funds.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any further comments or questions, Mr.
Just a question, on the Dowling extension, it looks like this coming construction season will complete the project.
I believe so, yes.
I don't see any out-year funding at all, so I don't know if there just wasn't funding or this really finally gets us
This is the
complete.
final segment that's under construction. It's starting this summer. I think it'll take 2 summers to probably build it, but I think it'll be underway.
Excellent, great connector.
Long time coming. Any further questions or comments?
Move to approve this administrative modification number 9.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Any opposition to approval? That's approved. We next have the item B, which is the 2015 UPWP amendment memo.
We want to do this obligation report right now. We could do it under.
Is that an informational item or an action item?
I don't believe there are any
It's an
actions.
information item.
Then let's do it in the information section.
Do it down below.
Item B, 2013 UPWP.
Okay. You have an item listed 5B, and then you have the large colorful piece of paper there. Basically, what this is when we do our work program, we come up with an idea of what we're expecting to spend in each task, and we shoot for this dollar figure, and then we go from there. And usually near the end of the fiscal year, and in this case, after the end of the fiscal year, we look to balance the program, because if we can spend up to 110% in an element, so all of the 100 tasks would be obviously the 100 elements. So we can spend up to 110% in an element and still be repaid by the FHWA. If we go over that 110% mark, that's non-participating, and the city would have to pick that up. And so this is that balancing act of trying to move monies around. These aren't additional funds, these are just moving some money out of the 100 element and putting it down into the 400 and 500 element, so that we don't go over that 110% mark. And you can see the memo shows you that we took money out of task 110 and 120 and moved them down into tasks 410 and 510 to balance it out. So both of those will come under, they'll be right around 103, 104% at the end of the fiscal year. And so we'd be able to be reimbursed fully for all of our efforts from last year. And this was heard by the TAC and approved at their, recommended approval at their February 13th meeting.
Thank you. Any discussion from the public? Very quiet group. Comments or questions from the committee?
I move to approve the major amendment to the 2013 AMATS Unified Planning Work Program.
Moved and seconded. Any objections to unanimous approval? Seeing none, that is approved. Thank you. Item C on our business items is the 2013 AMATS self-certification.
So soon this year, we will be going through the federal certification, where the feds come up and they send us a large questionnaire, and they come up and visit us for a couple of days and ask us all sorts of questions to make sure we're doing the process. All the rest of the years, we do a self-certification, and so that's what this is. And it basically says that we are certifying that we are meeting all the requirements the feds have in 23 CFR 450.334. And this went before the TAC. The changes that they recommended were in section B, under the air quality boundaries. We updated that to reflect some new information, basically about the unit maintenance area and some of the other stuff like that, for the PM10 and for the CO. And then under agreements, we added the language under C4, where it talks about the memorandum of agreement between the MOA and the Kinnickinnic Bridge and Toll Authority. And that agreement is fairly recent, and it relates to our model. When we build our AMATS transportation travel demand model, we create it, et cetera, and then different entities sometimes want to utilize that, different engineering firms, and in this case, Cabata, and we make sure that we sign an agreement with them so that when they get it, they understand what they can do with it, and that as soon as it leaves our purview, it is their model and it's not the AMATS model. Maybe based on the AMATS model, but we just want to make sure that we're clear on that. So that was an agreement that was signed recently, and we added, the TAC recommended adding that. Other than that, it is before you now, just the self-certification.
Okay, any questions or comments from the public on this item before us? Seeing none, any questions or comments from Mr. Steele, Mr. Birch, Mr. Sullivan, Ms. Heil? I've got a couple, Mr. Ronnie. Number one, is this going to require my signature on something ultimately to self-certify this, or is this just a board action that
This
we
will
vote on it?
In the past, it certainly has required your signature after the board
That,
approves
of course,
it.
makes me a little more apprehensive about approving this, but did we have any significant changes brought on by MAP 21 in our MPO processes? I know they changed some of the delegation limits in terms of population size and things like that, and FMATS is no longer technically an MPO, but were there any other substantive changes that we've incorporated based on MAP 21?
Nothing substantive that needed to come about in the self-certification that we didn't already add. I don't think there's anything really,
Okay.
the stuff on performance measure, which is kind of the main thing coming out of MAP 21, is not, you're not done with that yet, it's not ready yet.
Okay. Go ahead.
And our last time they were all up here, they came up with a number of items where we were a little bit thought we could do improvements on it. Does this reflect any of the output we've had to show that we have improved in those areas where they identified we needed improvement?
Not really, because this document is, I mean, when they do that fine tooth comb creature, that's a 30, 40-page document, and it goes through, the same kind of things in here, but so much more exhaustively that it fits in there, but it doesn't really fit in this. It talks about, your CMP is it needs to be updated. That was in there's the federal certification, and we talk about we're doing that right now. We're getting an RFP out on the street, but this is from 13, and we don't have that out yet, so it wouldn't really go in here, sort of thing.
Okay. Any further comments or questions?
Move to approve the self-certification of the Metropolitan Area Transportation Solutions self-certification process.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any objections to unanimous passage? Seeing none, that is approved. We next have business item D, which is the AAQAC appointees memo.
Yes, it's the AMATS Air Quality Advisory Committee, and what I did is I provided the resumes before you. The Air Quality Advisory Committee is our oldest advisory committee, but it's one of the 3 advisory committees that we have, and their membership has a couple of positions that were vacant and several members that were termed out, and so we have that list before, the nominees before you. Obviously, I didn't have a good day today. I must not have printed off that. I printed off the memo, but I didn't bring it to you, so I apologize. But that would be Kimberly Morgan, John Spring, Jim Brown, and Marge Stone King were the nominees. So,
And is there John?
John Lau.
Wow. Yeah, I think there's 5.
5, there should be 5 nominees. So the process has always been, they go through the technical committee and they offer their recommendations, and then you've taken them as a group to approve them or disapprove them. And you could do that however you want it, but that's how we've done it in the past.
Okay, well, we'll get to the interrogation here. Does the public have any comments or questions on the nominees as listed in this packet for the AAQAC?
Or he isn't here.
Are any of these nominees present? Another good question.
We can grill them.
Okay, we'll interrogate them. We'll interrogate Craig. Okay, seeing no questions then, I guess I want to bring something up that I think is relevant here, and that is that I'm concerned about the appearance of Mr. Spring being on the TAC. And I know the Air Quality Committee has the ability to appoint a member of the TAC. The TAC in this body put out a lot of work through consulting groups in this town, and Mr. Spring is currently on many contracts that involve air quality work. I believe that presents at least the appearance of a conflict of interest. And so I don't know that I object to Mr. Spring being on the Air Quality Committee, but I do have a concern if they were to try to appoint him as their spokesman onto the TAC, who do have control over financial matters, including contracting out of work. So how do we resolve that apparent conflict? And I will open that up to this panel and Mr. Lyon to discuss if anybody has any thoughts. I don't believe it's within our authority to designate, I mean, maybe it is. I had some research done, but maybe you have different. I don't think it's within our power to control who's nominated off the Air Quality Committee onto the TAC. So I guess my suggestion would be that we either abstain from approving Mr. Spring until we can get him in here and get his thoughts on whether or not he'd be willing not to serve on the TAC and just serve on this committee as a committee member, or I'm open to other suggestions.
I'll give you the background that I have.
Okay.
And he is, as you said, he's on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and he's there he's P&Z's nominee to be on the Air Quality Committee, because one of the seats on the Air Quality Committee is a P&Z rep. And so, that's how he came to be. His name got floated forward. The discussion did come up at the TAC. This exact discussion came up at the TAC. And although we don't, as far as I can tell, either through my research, have anything written down that talks about your purview for approving or not approving the nominee of the Air Quality Committee to the TAC. Since you are the MPO, the policy committee is the MPO, it seems to me that you would have final say on that. All of the other committees are advisory to you. The Assembly and P&Z are also advisory to you. So you are the MPO, you are the governing body. Seems to me that you could make that requirement be that he can be on the Air Quality Advisory Committee, but someone else should be the representative on the TAC. And I agree with you, because, I mean, if he were the TAC representative for the Air Quality Advisory Committee, when the UPWP came before the TAC, if there are any consultant contracts in there that he might be bidding on, then he shouldn't vote, and therefore we're down a member of a quorum. Same thing with the TIP. So the same discussion came up at the TAC. I would suggest that you have the ability to say, it can be anybody else but him.
So,
How about the more appropriate thing would be to pull out the bylaws of the committees and add in a conflict of interest requirement that's, fairly simply stated, and then that would address this issue and any issue in the future. Than trying to just name people's name or identify people's name, I think it'd be more appropriate to make sure that the bylaws have a clause in there about conflict of interest and eligibility for sitting on something.
And if I could also add that when Mr. Spring was on P&Z when the work program came before them in December. And at the start of that discussion, he made sure to state very loud and clear, I have a possible conflict and I want to make sure everyone is aware of this, and it's possible that I shouldn't vote on this, but I have some questions. And they of course said, well, you either have questions or you don't have questions, because you're either going to vote or you, so they made him vote if he wanted to ask questions. And like John, he likes to talk, so he took that ability to jump in there.
So one of the things that, Boyle gave me their bylaws here, they do have a conflict of interest. I think all we need to do is add a 2.5.3 that says, no committee member with a conflict of interest may sit on the technical advisory committee. And so they are not able to be that committee's representative to the technical advisory committee. That means they can still be on the committee, they can still vote within the realm of what's already in here for conflict of interest, but if there's a perceived conflict of interest, they're not allowed to represent the committee on the TAC.
I like that.
it works for me.
Okay,
Is
so-
it something we can modify right here? Is that the collective wisdom?
Sure, let's do it.
Until somebody stops us, we can do what we want.
Do you want to get his comments on it, asking that question before you do that, or is the record sufficient to?
Was Mr. Spring at the TAC meeting when his name was brought up?
He was not.
So does he have any idea that this whole discussion is taking
I have
place?
not had the discussion
Okay.
with him.
I kind of feel bad that he's not here in a way. I mean, it'd be nice to just at least let him know what we're thinking. I'm not going to try to pick on him.
Well, and I guess that's why I pointed out the fact that when it came before the P&Z, he did point it out. He didn't say specifically, I have possible contracts coming up, but he did point it out. So he's clearly aware of that there is he needs to make sure that's
The
clear.
P&Z role on the air quality committee is an important role, and they need to have a P&Z
A
person
voice.
on the air quality committee, but that doesn't mean that that person should be eligible to be considered for the TAC membership. So,
Did you make a motion?
Yeah, I was going to say.
I'll make a motion that we add a 2.5.3 item on the conflict of interest of the Air Quality Advisory Committee bylaws, that a committee member who has an identified conflict of interest may not be eligible to sit on the technical advisory committee as a air quality representative,
Second.
or something like that.
Close enough.
Perfect, until you get to that last part.
Please edit to be,
No, I think it was good.
I think it's good.
So moved and seconded. Does anybody from the public want to comment on that concept, that idea, that motion? No? Any further discussion from the board? Any objections to unanimous passage? Okay, so that's been passed. That was a little bit of a detour, but I think it was an important thing to cover in terms of these appointments.
Good catch.
So with that then, let us go back, and I believe we were at the point of, I guess I will ask, does the body just want to approve these as a package, or does anybody else have any other concerns about any of the other members?
I think it appears to me to be an extraordinarily well-qualified group of people willing to volunteer their time to participate, including Mr. Spring, and I would encourage us to, I can just pass them as a group.
Before we vote, can I ask one question? Is there currently, does P&Z currently have a member on the board, or is it going to then be vacant until, is there somebody that can be held over to at least get that point of view?
They have had, Commissioner Stacy Dean has been on the Air Quality Advisory Committee for several years, and she has resigned from the position on the Air Quality Advisory Committee. She's still in P&Z as far as I know, but she said, I'm not interested in doing that anymore, and they've already selected John Spring as the rep.
Is it going to be critical to have?
They're going to have their next meeting sometime in March to vote for chair, vice chair, and technical advisory committee representative. So this is very timely to approve these memberships, and as we pass this thing, I think we're fine.
And we're also starting the process of the TIP and the air quality conformity for that, and the MTP, and all of those things that we really need that expertise on there in full committee, so we can get quorums and that sort of stuff.
Okay. So you're good with
I'm
the
good,
modification we've got then?
Okay, move to approve all 5 new appointees to the Citizens Air Quality Advisory Committee.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any objection to unanimous approval? Okay, those people are approved. And John, Frank, can you contact John and let him know what happened here? Please tell him, just concerned about the appearance.
I'll tell him it was personal, he'll get over it.
Thank you.
Well, if he wasn't there when he was nominated, is he even aware that this action is taking place?
He knows that he was nominated, he was at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting where they said, you're going to be, because they have several committees that they seat people on, and this was one of the 3 or 4 that they do. And so he was there for that. He just wasn't at the TAC meeting when we called him out.
Okay. All right, thank you. Do we have any other business items that have come up that we have to address today? Yes, sir. So we're through the difficult part, now we get to be on to informational stuff?
Yes, sir.
Informed.
Okay, so under informational items, I guess, are we going in the order they're presented here? Northern access to UMed is number
We're ready to
1?
do that.
Number A? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Good job.
Just to get started while we wait for the machine, I'm Stuart Osgood. I'm with Bowel HKM. I'm the president of the company and the project manager for the UMed Northern Access Project. I've got a abbreviated presentation to walk through of kind of the status of the project. You may have heard about it a little bit. There's been some discussions about route selections in the media and out there, and we've reached a milestone of selecting an alternative and an alignment, and we're excited about pressing forward with the project. So, assuming that our slides come up, maybe I'll start off with just, we'll zip through the first few slides because I've done this presentation at least once before today. So this project is jointly managed by the Muni and DOT, and Our contract is actually with the Department of Transportation, but the municipality of Anchorage has been an equal partner in steering the project and in participating in the project and its development. In addition to the municipality and DOT, we've had very good involvement from South Central Foundation, the Tribal Health Consortium, Providence Hospital, University of Alaska, and Alaska Pacific University. And in fact, last year we signed an agreement to have a 7-party agreement on the project moving forward, and we assembled an executive steering committee that helped us through the process. Backing up just slightly, so there's an overview taken last September, looking to the north with a new sports complex under construction and prominently displayed in the center, just above the words AMATS. And then you see the development that extends out that little ridge line that UAA is currently developing out past the Arts Building. East High School is off there in the distance. Northern Lights cuts through here and is partially obscured by the tree growth there. I mentioned that it's a project, our contract is with DOT, but the municipality's been an equal partner in facilitating the development of the project. It's been excellent to see such great cooperation, both from DOT and from the organizations that are flashing up here now. Really a team effort and a group that have come together to cooperate, to help us with alternative selection, to help us with design components, to give us suggestions on how to facilitate the public outreach and reach out to their employees, their students, as well as the public overall. So really a great story, I think, about the power of joining hands and moving projects forward and making them better. I want to talk a little bit about land ownership, because part of the misconceptions that I have the unfortunate duty to do is to go in and show people actually land ownership that they thought was all designated parkland. And this is kind of one of the biggest misconceptions as we move forward, that if it hasn't been developed, if it's virgin land, then it must be designated as a parkland. So a lot of our educational work has been done here to show exactly kind of who owns the land in the UMed area. The green is MOA parkland, and it's largely confined to the area around the dog park, University Lake, immediately south of APU, and then the land right around Goose Lake, which is designated parkland. The purple is the University of Alaska's land, and they own the lion's share of the land in this, at least in this window, and much of the land in the UMed district, in fact. APU's is over on the east side of the campus, or the east side of the area. That's shown in yellow. Providence owns and controls what's in blue, and then South Central and the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium are using this land down here off of Tudor Road and own that land around Tudor Center Drive. So there is some parkland, but the lands that we intend to use and develop for this important road link is largely is under the ownership of UAA and maybe partially APU. The project's enjoyed terrific legislative support. I started on this project back in 2009, and we started on a recon report, which was to look at 14 separate alternatives to improving access into northern access into the UMed area. We completed that study. We got another $1 million from the legislature in 2013, and then $20 million was appropriated last year in the capital budget. So very good support from our elected officials at recognizing the needs for this, all the while they're seeing a lot of the development, the exciting things that are happening in the UMed district. The $20 million will fund final design and construction, as well as some other things like utility relocations and environmental mitigation and other things that we kind of put into that last pot of money. Also want to mention that the institutions in the area have continued to invest as well. You see Providence, and you see UAA, and they're building sports facilities, and there's private development going on, certainly around Lake Otis Parkway and down off Tudor Road. This is a thriving area of success for our city. It creates a lot of jobs, educates a lot of our people, and provides much-needed medical services. The issue of where are people coming from? So we, as part of our recon study, we went in and looked at zip codes of students, patients, and the workers that are coming into UMed, and looked at where those trips were coming from based upon their home zip codes. And 40 to 50% of the trips entering the UMed or are either destined originating from the UMed district. And so we continue to see, of course, people coming from as far away as the valley, but certainly Peters Creek, Eagle River, and all of northeast Anchorage relying on this area for their jobs and their medical services and their education. We all have heard the statistics before that 11% of the jobs in Anchorage are in the UMed district. And of all the work that we've done in this community, we've largely improved access from the south and from the west, not really from the north and the east. Elmore Road, 40th Avenue, the things we've done at Tudor and Lake Otis all have facilitated getting in and out of UMed district from the south and west. Really haven't done much to the north and east until now. Purpose and need for the project, improve mobility, and try to take some of the pressure off those intersections that are overcapacity and experiencing safety clusters and issues with crash rates. And not only to serve today's growth, but also the future growth in the UMed district. The need I covered previously, a lot of jobs, a lot of people, a lot of growth. Project has some challenges, and as I heard from many people at the public meeting, we typically build the easy things first, and then we leave the tougher things for last. And this project is one of those ones that we're maybe leaving a bit for last because there are some challenges. We've got some Class A wetlands that will be unavoidable, and we'll be working with the Corps to do everything we can to minimize and mitigate those. But there are some high ecological value wetlands that will be impacted by the project. And deep organics. In some cases, our geotech information shows 18 feet of organics till you get to anything that looks like soil. And our current practice, at least in the Anchorage Bowl, is that we take all of that out. We go to firm bottom. And we're anticipating in this case, and in our cost estimates, we're assuming that we'll be going to firm bottom on this project as well. There's a bunch of utilities in the areas. There's overhead power lines to start out with. There's a large sewer line that comes right down through the middle of the area. There's both fiber optic and copper pairs. And there's a gas line that extends through the area. All of those need to be avoided. One of the challenges that we're having there is that when those utilities were put in, they were floated through the peat. So if we build over the top of them, we're going to put stresses on those lines. And we want to avoid that. It's the old thing where if you touch it and it breaks, you got to fix it. And we'd rather not touch it and break it. We'll leave that up to the utility companies. Public comments and input. A lot of people care about this area, and it's been fun to go through the public involvement process. Certainly, the community is engaged. They care. We've had a couple of hundred people show up at our public meetings. We've had vigils. We've had all kinds of things. And I think it's just a sign that we've got a vibrant community that cares about what's happened, and we're trying to include them as best we can. A lot of divergent opinions about whether this project should be constructed or not, and we're trying to hear them all and do our best to find our way through the issues. And then, of course, we don't have a blank check. We've heard that our capital budget's going to be shrinking. We've got $20 million to finish this project up, and we intend to do so and make adjustments to scope to bring this project in within budget. I read in the paper this weekend that we hadn't done enough public involvement, or maybe we hadn't reached out, we hadn't heard people appropriately. We've had 300 written comments that have been submitted on this project in this phase alone, and we had at least that many in the recon. So we've been talking to anybody that would listen to us about it. Doesn't mean that we always can take their comments and roll them in, particularly if it's stop and don't do it. But we have tried, and we've certainly, Rachel Steer here has led a tremendous effort to reach out to anybody that would listen, or anybody that cared, or anybody that had something to offer to the project. We've had a couple hundred people at our meetings. These are the number of people that signed in. There are those that come and, for one reason or another, don't want to be associated with actually being there. We've had meetings with concerned citizens one-on-one, and then our executive steering committee has met on 3 separate occasions to provide input and feedback. It's been a great process. Public comments. So we take all of these 600 public comments that we have, 300 from this phase and whatever we had before, and you boil them down, and there's some that kind of tend to float to the surface. One is, we love the park, and the park is in quotes here because that misconception about hasn't been developed, it must be. And people coming back to how much time are you going to save the average motorist or the average emergency vehicle that's trying to come into the area, or the average cyclist, or whatever mode you're coming through. And of course, you talk to them about levels of service and reduced time, and the argument is, well, it's not worth destroying this green space for 22 seconds of reduced delay. So we get that comment a lot. We also get comments that, God, you engineers are wasting a lot of money studying things that should have been done long ago, get on with it. And then the issue of, if you're going to do it right. I tell people that we certainly did not start out this project saying we're going to do it and we're going to do it wrong. But by that, people mean context sensitivity, trail continuity, university feel, something a little bit special about this area. Let's not put a 5-lane section down through this area. And then if you build it, the direct connection is the best. And this comes back to a couple of different alternatives we had, which showed a less direct prior to us selecting the preferred alternative. So we ended up, we started out with 14 at Recon. We boiled it down to 4 of the most probable. And then we've gone through and selected here the orange route, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about. But the other routes, the red one and the green one, kind of came through the UAA campus, coming off of University Drive or off of Wellness/Alumni Loop. And then a purple one that kind of swings around, starts down here at Elmore and Providence, swings around and connects to Northern Lights out here on the Pine Street alignment. And the notion there was that if we came out here, we could stop cut-through traffic. People were trying to come up with alternatives that would let the UMed people that were originating or destined from UMed to use the road, but that would discourage people from using it that were using it as a cut-through route. So those are the 4 alternatives that we studied in detail and carried to a 20% design and did analysis on. I will quickly go through those alternatives in a moment. All of them have common design features, somewhat driven by budget, somewhat driven by information that we received back from the public, but a couple of travel lanes, posted speed of 30 to 35 miles per hour, 80 feet of right-of-way would be acquired from the University of Alaska. It's going to be an urban section, so curb and gutters. A couple of roundabouts, at least in all of the cases, providing vehicular access to UAA and potentially to APU in the future. We have 2 or 3 non-motorized grade-separated crossings. For some of the alternatives, we have 2. For some of them, we have 3. I think one of them maybe even has 4. Enhancing the signal at Northern Lights Boulevard, in-street bike lanes, relocated trails, and lighting throughout the project length. So all of the alternatives are built up along these basic criteria and features. In cross-section, this is what we envision the road to look like. Starting down here at the bottom, 80 feet of right-of-way. We've worked extensively with the University of Alaska statewide, the folks that control the lands, to show them where we want to acquire that 80 feet of right-of-way and how best to do that consistent with their master plan. A couple of in-street, couple of lanes in the street, in-street bike lanes. This cross-section is very similar to what we used when my firm was involved in designing the very southern end of Elmore Road down near Abbott, down past the lower 88th section, in-street bike lanes, 2 travel lanes. Separated pathway on one side and a sidewalk immediately adjacent to the roadway on the other. You see the lighting. And this diagram here is based upon actually what it looks like out there. If you haven't been out there to ski through there or walk or just take a stroll, that's kind of exactly what it looks like out there in the middle of the Class A wetlands. So the red alignment, again, comes off, whoops, pardon me. The red alignment that we analyzed came off of UAA Drive, came around the north side of the University of Alaska's campus, and then ties in out here at East High at Northern Lights. The green alignment comes along the south side, past the Arts Building, and then connects in out to Northern Lights and Bragaw. The orange alignment, which ultimately is our recommendation, I'll spend a little more time on this, a roundabout at Providence and Elmore, with a grade-separated crossing there for the trail connection that runs along Providence. Then the road comes up past KAKM, or Alaska Public Media, as they prefer to be known now. It then goes through an S-curve to realign. Notice that we're staying off of the footprint of the utilities, which we have concerns about putting our big, heavy road over and causing problems. So we'll be adjacent to those, but not over the top. We then would extend up. It'd be a roundabout at the very north end of the Arts Building parking lot, another grade-separated crossing for non-motorized users, another northern roundabout here to support the University of Alaska Anchorage's future development and master plan along the south side of Northern Lights, and then through an S-curve, and a slight S-curve, and then into a new signal out here at Northern Lights and Bragaw, with a third grade-separated crossing there to maintain the continuity of that heavily used trail that runs 100 feet or so south of Northern Lights Boulevard. The last alternative, similar to the orange in many respects, but then instead of continuing on to the north, curves around APU's property and connects in over here in the middle of the Northern Lights realignment, just past East High, between East High and Wesleyan Drive. We went through and analyzed each of these alternatives. This is the punchline, if you will. Looked at construction cost with contingency. We took a stab at environmental mitigation. We have had some contact with the Corps of Engineers about the project and gotten some feedback from them. Utility relocation efforts, even with our efforts to stay out of the path, are still rather significant. So we've put in some money there for potential impacts on the utilities that exist. And then the right-of-way. The right-of-way costs here are shown are based upon the net of what we would pay for the right-of-way under each of the scenarios versus what the University of Alaska deems as enhancements that facilitate their development going forward. So in our discussions, focusing in on the orange route again, we've got about $5 million at 18 bucks a square foot for 80 feet of right-of-way. It equates to about $5 million. And the University of Alaska has said, gee, those roundabouts, those grade-separated crossings, some of the trails that you're putting in, we feel really are things that we are willing to participate in the cost. And so we cannot donate the right-of-way, but we will acknowledge the fact that you are doing things with this roadway that enhance the capability of us, drive down the cost of us developing in concert with our master plan in the future. So that totals up to a project. 3 of the projects are within the $20 million worth of funding, 19.4 for the orange route. The purple route is a little bit higher because the right-of-way costs, it's the longest route, the right-of-way costs are higher, and a lot of the enhancements that we're putting in are far away from the University of Alaska's land and not much use to them. Went through a process of evaluating each of the alternatives based upon the criteria we had set forward. If you're familiar with Consumer Reports, we kind of scored them as favorable, somewhat favorable, and not favorable. And we don't think this is much of a close call on this. The orange route certainly meets the purpose and need. It's within our budget. We have universal support from the Executive Steering Committee that this is the right route, and many of the public comments also. From an environmental standpoint, we think that all of them have about the same level of environmental impact, maybe slightly less for the red or green, but University of Alaska is not at all supportive of the idea of routing traffic directly through their campus around Alumni Drive. And so this project certainly is more consistent with transportation plans. Response to public comments, again, public comments are all over the place. We think that this project does a very good job, at least in the design side, of addressing some of the public comments and the needs for grade separated crossings and trails and bike lanes. So the overall evaluation score we give is the orange is far and away the best alternative, and that's what we recommended to the Executive Steering Committee a couple of weeks ago that we go forward with. We have a resolution that's signed by the members of the Executive Steering Committee to support the orange alignment. I have just a couple of photos kind of to give you an idea. This is, if you were on the road looking south, the Arts Building is kind of shown here in the background. This is that mid section of grade separated crossing with the roundabout in the background and the general cross section that we would use. And this is kind of a bird's eye view if you're looking to the south and the east of the way the roadway would look, at least the alignment would look. Kind of turn things around now. This is East High and Northern Lights, the grade separated crossing, one roundabout, the second one, and then connecting in down here at Providence and Elmore. My last slide, I believe, or maybe second to the last. We've received concurrence, I believe, from the DOT and the municipality of the preferred alignment. We're moving forward with the detailed design and permitting. Working with the Corps, the wetlands permit is the big thing to be obtained. We've got a lot of work to do and many decisions to make, and I want to encourage the public to continue to stay involved. What we've shown them here is none of this is locked down other than the alignment. We've got a lot of discussions to go on about where the trails, which side the trails should be on, how wide they should be, what the surface should be, etc. But we will be complete with design this fall and start construction, certainly be under construction a year from now. This is a project that not only lends itself very well to winter construction, it really demands it. And we're shooting for an opening day in the fall of 2015, 1 year behind the sports arena. If you have any praise for the project, make sure you contact me. If you have complaints, Rachel's name is and address is at the top. I can take your questions, and I want to thank you again for listening. This is an exciting project, and we're thankful to be involved with it, and we think it'll enhance our community.
Thanks, Stuart. I think that was a good presentation, and thanks for keeping it short. I know you've probably got the thing memorized by now. So I don't think I'm really going to open this up to the public for a discussion. This isn't really supposed to be a public hearing or public meeting, but I will allow the board, if they have questions here, the committee, I guess I should say, we're not really a board. Yes, Chris, I know you've got questions. So let's keep it just to the committee, and Mr. Birch, please start us off.
Just on the right-of-way, 80 feet, knowing it's, you got a 4-lane in Bragaw to the north, and you've got Elmore as a 4-lane to the south. This is 80-foot of right-of-way permit. If at some point in the future you need to go to a 4-lane road through there, is that 80 feet accommodate that? And if that's the case, are those pedestrian bridges, are they long enough, or would they be long enough to permit an additional 2 lanes in that right-of-way?
Yeah, that's a good comment. We received that, Chris, from a number of members of the public, and I think the answer is that we will certainly, in working with the University of Alaska, we'll make those bridges long enough to accommodate any expansion of the roadway that might be necessary going forward. On the right-of-way side, I think the University of Alaska would be willing to do something like we do on arterials, where we do setbacks from that, so if the road ever needed to be expanded, they haven't built right out to the edge of the right-of-way. But those are the kind of comments we want as we advance the design to make sure that we're not building ourselves into a box. I'll stop there. I can talk to you a lot about modeling and other things, but that would be boring.
Well, great briefing. I love the orange route. I'm familiar with the area, and it's a long-needed improvement, and appreciate your work on it. Good.
Thanks, Chris. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, is there any needed improvement to that intersection of Northern Lights and Bragaw on the north side? In other words, are we going to have to take some right away from either side or something to make turns better, or?
Yeah, we've received the comments about putting dual rights in coming south into that intersection from Bragaw. We're going to be looking at signal timing on that whole intersection and lane configurations, because you're right, we're going to be taking green time from Northern Lights to accommodate this volume, and we want to make certain that we've got a intersection there that functions at least as well as it does now. We have heard suggestions, though, about adding an additional right on the southbound side, on the southbound approach to Northern Lights.
And I'm afraid we're going to have some issues further down the road towards the highway, perhaps.
The one thing I would say about that is that our model shows that kind of on opening day will be in the 8,000 to 10,000 trips on this section. A lot of those trips are coming off of UAA Drive and now just using a more direct route, so it's not an additional 8,000 trips on Burgaw. It'll be much less than that because they're already coming all the way around the Horn anyway.
When the sports complex breaks, I'm sure it'll be a lot of traffic going out that direction, I would think, too.
That'll be an interesting opening day when the final horn sounds on.
Ms. Heil, any questions? Mr. Sullivan?
And just to comment, been intimately involved in this project from day one, and very, very rare to have all the stakeholders, involved in the UMed district, really unanimously supporting this project. And I know there's community concerns, and rightfully so, but I think we kind of stressed from day one it was going to be a context-sensitive design. We were going to make it more of a country lane than a cut through, and try and discourage cut-through traffic. And the thing about the sports arena, of course, they'll be operating mostly at night, and you'll have a whole separate group of travelers rather than what you have during the daytime going to employment. So that should help that a bit. But good job, and appreciate working with you guys.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll let you go. Stuart, thanks for your presentation. Freight mobility is next.
Freight mobility is next.
All right, Teresa, are you going to talk to us about freight
Yeah,
mobility?
thank you.
Good.
Chair Campbell. As you know, the freight mobility study and the update is something that we've wanted to undertake for about the past year. We had to move that project to a slightly later date while you amended the budget you were looking at earlier. And so what we did is we were seeking a local match of $21,000. And so we approached the Alaska Trucking Association and Rich Wilson at the port to seek those funds with a local match from private industry. And they have raised $14,500 for that match. We are still seeking $8,000 for that match. That's been a project that the Freight Advisory Committee has been working on, and we're the only organization in the country to have done that. So thank you so much, Aves and Rich. Sure. So also what the Freight Committee worked on this year too was a freight tip criteria. And the new tip criteria had to have MAP 21 performance measures, include MAP 21 criteria. So they worked on all those new improvements and requirements to provide freight mobility, freight access, economic vitality into the tip criteria. And the tip criteria is to score and evaluate projects that are up for tip nomination. So following that, they also had several tip nominations, which is included in your memo for the 2015 and 2018 tip nominations, which I'm sure you'll see here shortly on their draft. But one of their major concerns is the Ocean C Street ramp. Coming down into the port access is very difficult, and the pavement probably needs some reconstruction or some rehabilitation. So it was one of the major projects that they would look at for access into the port. You may know that there is a initiative by the USDOT for a primary freight network and a national freight network. And the Freight Advisory Committee commented on that. There is a center line of 27,000 miles for the national and primary freight network that was brought forward by the USDOT. None of those miles are included in the state of Alaska. So we asked for specific facilities and then also asked them to look at their 41,000 mile proposal. So they wrote some recommendations to the USDOT secretary, and primarily their concerns was, again, the access into the port and including some of those facilities into the port. They also held a tour with the Air Mobility Squadron out at Joint Base Elmendorf. We also have a freight advisory military representative, Colonel Kendra Matthews. She is from the Alaska Command J4 Logistics Director. So she now serves as our representative. They continue to look at site plans and road design reviews. And another final project that they're working on now is just a public service announcement, a radio spot that will just help other drivers understand how freight moves and safety around that. And that script has been approved, and it should go into production probably this week.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Any questions from the crew on the freight mobility updates just given? Mr. Steele? No. Birch?
Keep it moving. Good work.
Mr. Sullivan? Okay, thank you.
Change.
Next we have on here our Alaska Railroad update.
The other Mr. Sullivan.
There's a lot of those around.
Limit on how many we can have in a room. I'm Tim Sullivan, I'm the manager of external affairs for the Alaska Railroad. I was asked to come and give just a brief overview on what we have going on at the railroad and kind of what's happening with our situation down the hill here. And I'll run through these rather quickly, and if you have any questions, just go ahead and stop me anywhere along the way. This is our obligatory quick facts page talking about our organization, which I think most of you are familiar with, that we're independently owned corporation that's owned by the state and run by a 7-member board, all of whom are appointed by the governor. We're currently running at about 586 year-round employees, which is down about 300 from our peak in 2008. And 429, about 80% of our employees are members of 5 different unions. What we've been seeing recently and getting right into it is a decrease in the freight that we've been moving. We've been seeing a major reduction in coal movements coming out of Usabelli and going internationally. And as you can see on the bottom there, that light blue, the light blue block down the bottom has been the reduction that we've been seeing in bulk petroleum. Most of that is movements from Flint Hills Petroleum in North Pole. And as the recent announcement from Flint Hills that they're going to stop using that as a refinery indicates, that block is going to get a lot smaller here really fast. Our passenger service, after changes, after the, in 2008, we saw a peak of about a little over 500,000 people who we moved on the Alaska Railroad. Between the recession and the taxes on the cruise ships, we saw quite a reduction coming into 2009, 2010, and a little pickup. And we're back up again near the 500,000 range for 2013. And very happy to see, you can see that this is split apart into the blue lines being what is our Alaska Railroad ridership. Those are the people that we carry on our trains. The yellow blocks are the folks that are our pull customers that we pull in cruise ship trains. And we're really happy to see that the numbers down on the bottom there are just about even with where they were in their peak for people who are actually riding on Alaska Railroad trains as opposed to just people that we get to pull along. Another piece of our income, as we talk about freight, we talk about passenger, the third-legged stool. Third leg of that stool is our real estate. That was part of our dowry when we were sold to the state from the federal government. We came up with 36,000 acres of land out of that. We use about half of that for right-of-way railroad uses and outright leased. It's a really important part of our revenue. As you notice by the number down there in the bottom, in 2013, it represented 3/4 of our corporate net income. That's just a big chunk of what we use to weather the goods and the bads of economic cycles. When we have issues with freight, when we have issues with passenger, we're able to lean on our real estate and help that to make up what we need to keep the railroad running. Another part of revenue that we receive is our FTA formula funds, which you're all familiar with. We get that because we provide, as quoted there, our regular continuing shared ride surface transportation services that are open to the general public. I'm supposed to say it exactly that way. So we saw a major cut in 2012. Our numbers that had been at about $36 million a year that we received from FTA were cut down to $28 million, and they increased what we had to put in for a match from 9% to 20%. That was an effective cut of over $12 million a year in federal funding that we had been receiving. And it's up for reauthorization again in 2014, although it was 3 years to get the last one of the 5-year bill done, so there's no telling when it will actually come up again. But we are working on making sure that we don't get attacked again, or we'll see how it all happens back in D.C. And the fun thing that we're facing right now, and I know this has been something we've been talking about a lot, is positive train control, which we're mandated to do because of the passenger service we offer. There's a leftover in there. Positive train control, as I mentioned, it's an unfunded federal mandate. We expect it's going to cost somewhere between $150 and $160 million to complete. It's, for all intents and purposes, dead man switch GPS controlled device that sending information to satellites to make sure that that trains don't do some of the things we've seen recently in accidents, with the accidents in New York and accidents in Europe where the people running the train went too fast around a turn. This will allow for the trains to actually slow down and stop themselves. The biggest thing for us is that a lot of this is happening in dark territory where there isn't a lot of communications, where there isn't electrification, where we don't have the resources to just plug into a light switch or plug into an outlet. So we're having to create from whole cloth energy producing situations out in dark territory. Everything is having to be backed up and backed up and backed up again, whether it be a solar powered and a little bit of wind power and then having a diesel generator on it. And we have to do this at every switch and every signal that we have along the Alaska Railroad. We've put in, and I think the next slide, well, we'll talk a little bit about what we've done. We've put in about $65 million on this project already. That leaves about $90 million left to go. We received $20 million from the state last year to get it done. We're requesting another $40 million for the next 2 years from the state. So we're working on seeing how that'll go. If we don't comply, the fines get pretty onerous pretty quick. There's 61 different fines that they can levy upon us every day that we don't do it. There's $16,000 a day, unless it's a willful noncompliance, and then it's $25,000 a day. And it's not just the company that is responsible for it, it's the people at the company as well, meaning the executive, the CEO and the board would also be responsible for the railroad not complying with this action. And of course, the best part about it is that it would make us stop passenger service. So we took a look at it, and we've always known that our passenger service is important. We like it. We think we're an icon of the state. And so we hired the McDowell Group to do an economic report on what the passenger service of the Alaska Railroad means to the state of Alaska. It's a little under 2,000 jobs in the state. 1,970 jobs are represented by the passenger service of the Alaska Railroad. 270 of those are direct at the Alaska Railroad. The rest of them are passenger service partners that we work with. And then the non-resident passenger spending brings in another 900 jobs for those folks who ride on the Alaska Railroad. That breaks down to about $50 million in labor income related to our passenger service every year. So where have we gone in funding? As I mentioned, we spent $63.8 between 1997 and 2013. In 2014, we received almost $20 million from the state. We're requesting another $40.8 million. We are actually in the governor's capital budget for $15 million for this year, but we're continuing to ask to try and get up to that 40.8 number, which still leaves an unfunded amount for 2017 and 2018 of almost $30 million. Of course, what this graph doesn't represent is that there's an additional $5 to $6 million a year that we'll have in maintenance costs of this PTC project once we have it implemented. So, staying on the track of not so fun issues, Flint Hills. You've all heard the report on what's happening with Flint Hills up in North Pole. We recognize that that's going to be about an $11 million revenue loss off our top line, which is about a 50% reduction of what we were doing in 2003. That's down, as you can see by this graph, you probably can't see these numbers very well, but our peak in 2003, that was already down 75% from that peak in 2003. Back then, they represented about 50% of our overall freight revenue. In 2013, they were 22% of our overall freight revenue, still our single largest customer at the Alaska Railroad. This has put the whole fuel market in flux. No telling what's going to be moving from where to try and figure out how to continue to supply airports and Fairbanks and asphalt and all sorts of other things that need to happen. And so we're working with other customers to see how we can continue to play a part in moving fuel around the state. And we've put in immediate cost containment measures just to wait to see how the market reorganizes. Good things. The Northern Rail Extension, which is happening up in Salcha, the bridge across the Tanana River, we have a bridge. It goes all the way across, goes from one end to the other. We'll have a ribbon cutting sometime probably in late August, early September. It was on time, on budget, and we are really happy with getting that project done. As you can see, it was a $188 million project, and we end up having the largest bridge in the state of Alaska once it's completed. This was instigated by the Department of Defense. They wanted to be able to have year-round access to J Park, the joint practice area across the Tanana River. They had previously only been able to get over there through ice bridges in the wintertime, so they're going to be using it to access that all year round now. The Port McKenzie Rail Extension continues to move along. There has been, I believe it's $170 million has been funded for this project. It's a 32-mile long extension of the railroad from the Y in Houston down to Port McKenzie. And 170 million funded, about $100 million still left to go. One of the interesting things about this project, as opposed to the Northern Rail Extension Bridge, that was a one-piece project. It got bid out as one big project. This was bid out as 6 different projects. It's allowed for a lot more local contractors to be able to take pieces of it, rather than bidding out a $250 million project and having one lower 48 big contractor get all of it. We've been able to break it into 6 little pieces so that local contractors have been able to pick up quite a bit of the work and be the ones managing this project. The economic development that's going on in Port McKenzie, we've been, there's been quite a bit of more interest as the project gets closer and closer to being done. We've been working with the AMATS Borough. They're actively engaged in finding customers, and opportunities are out there. And as part of our charter responsibility when we were purchased with the state is to be a tool of economic development for the state. And this is sort of a prime example of that. Something that might be on the horizon, there's a lot of talk of moving LNG and a lot of desire up in the interior to have that be there. There's talks about trucking it from the North Slope. We've also been in conversations about the ability to be able to move it from Cook Inlet up to Fairbanks. We have that ability almost immediately. The biggest thing is getting the LNG, the ISO containers, which we could get within 12 to 18 months, and be able to move that service, be able to provide that service to folks in Fairbanks or anywhere along the rail belt. And what does the future hold besides ideas of doing LNG? We're going to continue moving forward. We're a critical part of the state's infrastructure. We need to make sure that we continue to be a critical part of the state's infrastructure and be there for economic development and be there for the people of the state. If there's any large projects that happen in the state, any large development projects, we see ourselves being a part of it, whether the Watana Hydro Dam goes or if there's a gas pipeline, whatever happens, we'll end up being a part of that. And it's important to us that not only are we externally strong, but we're internally strong, that we look the part on the outside, that when people come up here and see the railroad, that folks who live here see the railroad, we look like we're supposed to look. We look like the icon of the state of Alaska, and we maintain what we can do on the inside and be able to do that very well. And of course, if all that fails, get a reality show.
Yay.
So we like to say that this is where people are supposed to decide which one of these groups are which one of these couples are the folks that work for the railroad. But we had a series that aired on Destination America channel called Railroad Alaska. They ran 6 episodes. They tell us it was the highest viewed show that they'd ever had, and they're back to do a second series of 8 to 10 episodes this winter. So it's all sorts of fun, and that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Steele? Mr. Birch?
Yeah, I've got a couple. On the positive train control, do you need it? I mean, notwithstanding the federal requirements, I mean, is this something, are you getting drugged to the party here, or is this something that you actually, is it something you really need? Or is it something that's being, as you stated, an unfunded mandate?
It is, it's a safety measure, and paramount to us is safety. It may not be the thing that we would necessarily spend $150 million on, at grade crossings, straightening curves, working on our capital that we already have, making sure that our infrastructure is in good shape, may be where we choose that. But we'd actually been working on PTC since 1997. The mandate didn't come down until 2008, but what changed was the amount of PTC that we would have to implement and the timeline. They've actually put a very fast deadline on it of 2015, and they're requiring us to do it on all of our rail. So it is something that we recognize that there is safety inherent in doing it, but it's more expensive than we had intended and going a lot faster than we had intended. I think it's we'll see how that all shapes up.
Okay, well, I mean, that provides some relief in that, knowing that it's not, I mean, it's got some good constructive purpose. Secondly, on the, I've talked to your new president on occasion about the bringing natural gas up from Nikiski, which makes superb sense to me, since you already have an LNG plant. You could pull 10% of that and run it north to Fairbanks, and it would What sort of volume would you be looking at to be equivalent to what they're looking at trucking over Adigan Pass, which I think is a torturous and painful route?
You mean how many trains would we have?
How
to
many
run?
trains, yeah, how many, you had 100, you had the million ton equivalent, I think you had like, I forget what Flint Hills was, but you had your, I mean, would that be something that you'd have the capacity?
Yes,
to
we have the
do it?
capacity to do it. I don't remember exactly what the numbers are in Fairbanks. I think it's somewhere around 7 million cubic feet on a daily basis is what they're talking about needing there. We could do that.
And there's no FRA certified rig at this point, right? I mean, there's nothing that's currently certified for moving LNG. I guess you can move ethylene, you can move all sorts of other petroleum products, but for LNG?
No, there's those ISO containers that I showed, they can move LNG. That's my understanding.
Okay, yeah, because okay, well, that's good. And lastly, I just want to say, great job on the Christmas train. We've done that the last few years, and that's a highlight of the year for the grandkids.
Oh,
So,
good. Good
good
I think we're
work.
going to run more of those this year. I think we're going to add another weekend, so we'll see what we can do.
A great briefing, thank you.
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, one short question in terms of, you talked about the right-of-way as a revenue source.
Yes.
And I know there was, I'm sure, a little bit of a controversial issue when folks along the right-of-way in the urban areas were notified that that railroad actually did have a right-of-way, and if you're using it, you gotta pay for it. Has that kind of been worked out? And is that a substantial, well, I don't know what substantial is, but part of the revenue stream?
It will not be a substantial part of the revenue stream when that comes through. Let me just clarify. We don't make very much revenue, if any. The revenue we make off our right-of-way is minimal. What we make it off is the land holdings that we have that are outside of our right-of-way. That's where our revenue comes from. When you look at the Ship Creek area, the land holdings that we have in Healy and in Fairbanks and those sorts of areas, what we have for docks, we own the dock in Seward. We are half owners of the dock in Whittier. So all of that plays into our real estate and what we own and where we're making revenue off of that. As far as the right-of-way, residential right-of-way use policy, that was just completed by our board in November, I believe. Notices went out to people in January, so they'll have till August to apply. The costs involved in that are below what it's going to cost us to manage that program. So this is a bigger part of safety to make sure we know that people are doing safe things in the right of way. We had originally started with that project to say, just kick everybody out of the right of way, and talking with our neighbors and a lot of the folks, especially down in South Anchorage, about how we should manage this project, changed it to where it ended up.
It was a good solutions, I think, in terms of being a little more lenient rather than just vacate the right of way.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan, any questions?
No, I share Mr. Birch's comments though about shipping gas north. We've been fortunate with a bit of a renaissance in Cook Inlet. I know Buccaneer and Hillcorp have both spoken to Ada about moving gas north, and I just hope we don't spend too much money on these disparate projects, just pick a winner, which I think is south to north. But and then, of course, there's the plant in Port McKenzie, so you don't have to use Nikiski. You can just move closer to McKenzie, and I've heard that can be expanded to as needed. So I hope that works out for the railroad. And for Fairbanks, of course.
And for Fairbanks.
Tom, any questions? I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
On that note, Mr. Chairman, I have
Tom, is everything?
Yes.
See you next month. Our next informational item is item D, AMATS UZA boundary update.
Okay. This might look familiar to you, this large map here. We brought this to you sometime last fall. Every 10 years, we look at the census numbers, and they show that we have increased the urbanized areas, and we have to reflect that in our map. And so we went through the exercise of creating this new boundary map to show the expanded urbanized area. And the information we got was a little bit off. The information that we got said, look at the census blocks, and if you want to smooth out the census blocks, you just need to offer a justification for why you are doing that. And so the areas that we smoothed out there was part of the parkland in Eagle River that we thought, well, that's parkland, no one lives there, so let's get rid of that. And then the boundary down in South Anchorage, where that, you can see the line going out into the Coastal Wildlife Refuge, the blue part, the water part. We thought, well, that's water, we should take that out. So we smoothed that out, and then there was, some other minor things that we smoothed out. And we submitted this to FHWA, and they basically said, no, you can only add more stuff in. You can't erase anything. If it's in a census block, you have to keep it in there, period, end of story. So this is, this came before the TAC this month as an informational item, and we're just kind of sharing it with you today for information as well. We will bring it before you next month as a business item to basically say, here's the map. We are not smoothing anything out because we can't. We're just adding whatever they say, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense to us. So if it's water, it's in, but there you go. So it's just an informational item to let you know that it'll be back before you, even though you already, we thought we had approved it and sent it on its merry way.
Okay, is there any particular ramifications to this other than minor annoyance?
That's it,
Okay,
as far as I can tell.
I'm used to that. Okay, so we've got 2015, I didn't mean to cut anybody off. Does anybody have a question? Oh, sorry.
Good background, thanks.
2015, 2018 tip update.
Yeah, I just wanted to real quickly get this before you. As you know, we are going through the process of creating the new tip, and we had 12 or so roadway nominations and about, I think it was 11 transportation alternative nominations and 2 CMAQ nominations. So we ranked and scored those along with the all of the short-term projects in the MTP. And the ranking committee of 6 members, a couple of folks from DOT, several people from planning, MOA planning, and from the Public Works Department, and also from the Health Department, and for the roadway ones, and then that same sort of group along with someone from the Bike and Ped Committee for the TA category. And here are those results. And so we took this to the TAC 2 weeks ago, and they had the comments that are reflected in this spreadsheet with the 3 columns to the right, along with the kind of yellow highlighting. And so this is our version of the truth of how the projects ranked and scored, and then in addition, some direction from the TAC on which ones they thought we should include in our soon-to-be hopefully released draft tip. The plan is to release the draft tip at the March 13th Technical Advisory Committee, or certainly recommend that it be released by you folks at the March 27th committee meeting. So I don't know, we don't know yet how far down the line will go. I mean, we may only have enough money to fund the top 5, it may be 10, it could be 15, depending on what the actual allocation is and how much we think each one of these projects are going to be. Some of these projects were in the MTP as the full-blown project, and the suggestion at the TAC level was that category of maybe we should do a recon study first to find out if it's still a good project, and whether there are gigantic obstacles in the way in terms of wetlands or right-of-way or all that sort of stuff. So that was kind of the discussion that came out of the TAC. And so I'm just sharing that with you today so you're in the loop. Again, as I said, we hope to provide you with a draft at your next meeting. And whether it's going to be released by the TAC on the 13th or recommended that you release it on the 27th, I guess that remains to be seen. We still need to have a tip in place so that we can hit the ground running October 1 of this year. So that would suggest kind of a September or maybe even a August timeframe for approval, with all the planning and zoning and the assembly and the public involvement that needs to go in there to take that place. So happy to answer more questions to go into more detail if you'd like to see what some of those suggestions were. I'll stop talking.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, just a conversation that we've had at the municipal level in terms of priorities between item 1 and 3. It may be that, and we haven't, three folks haven't gotten together at least to talk about municipality raise, but they want to switch positions between, and I know that the scoring is the issue, but between the Spenard Road Rehab, Hillcrest to Vincent, and the Spenard Road Rehab, Vincent to Minnesota, it's kind of, the Vincent, Minnesota is kind of the next phase down, and so at some point, we may bring that forward. Part of it depends on state contribution.
When you say municipal level, you're talking about the assembly?
I'm talking about the mayor and the assembly, not the whole assembly, but Patrick and I have chatted about it with the chair.
Okay.
So it's a priority item for us, and they're, depending upon what happens with the state with funding this year, that road certainly is a higher priority than the repaving stuff from Vincent, Minnesota.
Yeah, I've got a couple things to say about that, I think. And the Spenard Road Rehab, which I talked to my staff about earlier this week, this is not actually a rehab. It's in this short notation, this is actually talking about putting that couplet in down there by Spenard Road and 36th.
Oh, okay.
So it's a little bit misleading.
That's kind of the next day. I mean, we haven't got to that section yet, so.
Yeah, but I think that leads me into a conversation that I want to have a little bit of here, and that is that, when I look at these things, almost all these projects to me have, I don't know what significant obstacles are in other people's minds, but between Spenard Road and Fireweed, and between the municipality and the state, we've been opening and closing projects out there for decades.
Yep.
And we've been continually getting our brains beaten in.
We've got huge
projects.
agreement on that in terms of the landowners and the Chamber of Commerce and everybody, but
And
there are a few holdouts.
I don't disagree that we've done a lot of work out there, and we've got some people that agree with what we should do, but I'd be willing to bet that there are people that still are vehemently opposed to what we have to do.
There's two or three out of 140 or whatever it is.
We've got generations of people that are opposed to our projects out there.
Anyway, it's gonna come up
Passed
in
down
conversation,
from
I
father to
presume.
daughter
So,
to-
yeah.
So my concern on these things is that as we see the federal government shift their emphasis towards more of an operations and maintenance side, and their funding, they're really trying to force their funding into that side of the house. When I look at these major capital improvements, and we're seeing it even on O'Malley Road, for example, we spent, 3 years out there just trying to move ahead on O'Malley
Yeah,
Road.
there's still controversy.
And it seems like it's a straightforward, literally, O'Malley Road is a straight road, there's no curve in it at all, and yet trying to extend a 4-lane section for 3/4 of a mile between the New Certain Highway and Lake Otis, where there's traffic stacked up every day from Lake Otis, clear down past Anchorage Sand and Gravel. It seems like a no-brainer. The federal process is such that it has driven us into a quagmire of non-productivity. And so when I look at these projects, I just think to myself, boy, as a state DOT, in my familiarity with the federal process, I am really skeptical that these are a good fit for federal dollars. Having said that, of course, it's, a committee, and the committee will decide what we need to do. But one of the things I'm interested in talking about with, after the election, when we get a new policy committee in here, is at the policy level, looking at these things and saying, are these reasonable projects for this group to be taking on, and expecting progress in our lifetime? I just am afraid that we're losing momentum on so many of these projects that it just becomes kind of a never-ending planning or never-ending design process where we're not really being very effective at putting stuff in the ground.
No argument at all.
So that is a concern that I have with these things. But I do recognize that the committee has done what we've asked them to do. They've applied the scoring criteria, and I guess what I'm saying at a policy level, I'm not sure I like the outcome, so maybe we need to tweak the scoring criteria in the future. But we'll take that on. Did anybody, Mr. Birch, any further comments on this?
No, I would agree with some of the comments that have come out earlier. I know the whole Spenard Road, 3 lanes, 4 lanes already, it's been a huge tangle. And
Okay.
I'm not sure what the answer is, but at some point you got to sit down and build something.
Yeah, and I'd like to focus on building stuff that's readily buildable.
That's ready
not
to go.
readily arguable.
Yeah.
Seems to be where we focus our attention.
Good briefing, thank you.
Okay. I think we've got one more thing, and that was the OB report that we kind of deferred. James, can you take us through that in like 30 seconds, or we're going to be racing out of here?
I will be as quick as I can.
Thank you.
James Boyle, Alaska DOT and Public Facilities. I'm the AMATS planner for Central Region. Before you is the fourth quarter 2013 obligation report. At the end of every quarter, the DOT just likes to go back and check our financial documents, which this is what this is, against the TIP, to make sure that the TIP is in line, the TIP is balanced. This, like, as I said, is the fourth quarter obligation report for 2013. And really, the biggest thing to point out here is that at the end of the year, we had initially said, or at the beginning of the year, we had about $26.5 million worth of projects in the TIP that we assumed we would obligate for that fiscal year. And at the end of the fiscal year, in column 2, where it says obligated, deobligated, you can see that we were able to obligate all $26.5 million of projects for the AMATS area. So really, that's the biggest thing in this report, in that particular table. So overall, it was a good year for AMATS on the financial side, and we were able to balance fiscal year 13 against the TIP. So that's really this report in a nutshell.
Perfect. So the good news is we spent all the money we were entitled to spend.
We spent what we should have spent.
Perfect.
Didn't spend more.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Nice way to close the meeting. Do we have anything else, Mr. Lyons, other than the upcoming meetings?
That's it.
So our next technical advisory committee meeting is March 13th. Policy committee meeting is March 27th. And we are adjourned.
Thank you.